I am not here for forgiveness. I am here to carve truth from silence. My name is Clara Mason, and at 26, I carry the weight of a childhood left behind like a suitcase. No one claims. When I was 12, my parents drove me down a winding road in the New Mexico desert, their promises as thin as the dust trailing our car. They said it was temporary, a summer stay. But the truth was in their eyes, averted, unblinking, already looking past me. Now standing on the edge of this sprawling land, I've come back not to mend, but to make sure the lies stop here. The desert stretches before me, vast and unforgiving its silence, louder than any apology I'll never hear. This is my story, not theirs, and it begins with a house, a man and a promise that held me together when everything else fell apart. I was 12 when my mother, Sylvia Torres, leaned across the front seat of our battered SUV, her voice soft but sharp. Just for the summer. Clara. 3 months. That's all. My father, Martin Torres, gripped the wheel. His knuckles pale against the cracked vinyl. He didn't speak, didn't look at me. Just drove through the red dirt roads of Taos County, the landscape blurring into a haze of sagebrush and sky. They dropped me at a weathered adobe house, its clay walls baked by decades of sun, the tin roof glinting like a warning. The air smelled of piñon and rust, and my duffel bag bit into my shoulder as I stood there waiting for a glance that never came. My grandfather, Samuel Ortiz, waited in the doorway. His flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, his stance solid as the mesas behind him. "Come in," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. Sylvia kissed my forehead without touching it. Martin offered a half wave, and then they were gone. The SUV's tires grinding gravel until the sound vanished into the wind. Inside the house groaned like it was alive. The living room was dim, cluttered with books propping up a sagging table. Shelves heavy with faded photos and a clock that wheezed instead of chimed. Samuel didn't hug me, didn't ask how I felt. He pointed to a narrow staircase. "Your room's up there, got an old radio." The room was sparse, a cot, a frayed rug, a window framing endless fields. But on the nightstand sat a flashlight and a folded towel, small gestures of care that felt like a hand extended across a chasm. I clutched the flashlight that night, my shoes still on, staring out the window, willing headlights to appear. They didn't. The moon slid across the sky, and I lay there, the towel untouched, my heart pounding with a question I couldn't ask. Why didn't they want me? Morning brought the crackle of a radio in the kitchen, jazz cutting through static. Samuel stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a precision that felt like ritual. He didn't ask if I'd slept, just slid a plate in front of me. "Eat," he said. I didn't ask when they'd return. The fear of his answer soon or never kept my mouth shut. Breakfast became our routine: toast, always slightly charred, one slice darker than the other. I took the burnt one, not sure if it was his test or my choice. He never sat with me, just stood at the sink sipping from a chipped mug etched with Ortiz timber, 1968. The house was quiet, save for the clock's tick and the floorboard's sighs. He didn't treat me like a burden, but he didn't coddle me either. He gave me space to exist, and in that space I began to breathe. Afternoons, I wandered the property, acres of scrubland, bordered by rusted barbed wire and tire tracks. Behind the barn was a shed, half workshop, half museum of broken machines. Tractors, pumps, tools. With stories I didn't know, Samuel spent hours there, grease on his hands, a radio murmuring baseball scores. One day I lingered too long. He looked up from a carburetor. "Want to try?" he asked, holding out a wrench. I hesitated, then stepped forward. My hands were clumsy, too small for the tool, but he didn't sigh or take it back. He showed me how to turn the bolt, patient as the desert itself. When it loosened, he gave a single nod, a smile flickering like a spark. We didn't speak of it again, but he handed me a rag to wipe my hands, and I felt something shift, a crack in the wall I'd built around myself. Evening meals were simple: beans, cornbread, sometimes a slice of meatloaf from a foil tray. We ate like strangers, sharing a shift, the radio filling the silence. I didn't ask why he lived alone, why my parents' names never crossed his lips. I was afraid he'd confirm what I already suspected they'd let me go. Not out of necessity, but choice. One night he set a wooden box on the table. Found this in the barn, he said. Inside was a rusted compass and a pocket knife, its handle carved with. So I didn't know if it was a gift or a test, but I took it, the weight of the knife grounding me. Yours, if you want it, he said. I nodded, and the box stayed by my bed. A quiet promise I didn't yet understand. The next morning, I found a file in the shed tucked under a stack of manuals. Court papers, my parents' signatures scrawled at the bottom, relinquishing custody. The words blurred as I read them, not because I cried, but because I didn't know how to feel. Samuel didn't mention it, but that afternoon he handed me a wrench mid-repair, our fingers brushing. He cleared his throat. You'll need your own tools soon. It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. I added a new thought to the list in my head. If they come back, don't ask why they left. Ask why they stayed away. I didn't call it engineering then. It was just fixing what was broken, a hinge, a latch. The barn's sputtering heaters, Samuel noticed, leaving tasks half-done, screws. Loose wires tangled, daring me to step in. I did every time. By 16, I was sketching designs inspired by a magazine article about a collapsible wheelchair. Samuel's was ancient, barely functional. A relic from his time in the service. I wanted to build something better, something he wouldn't have to wrestle. I stayed up late, my arms aching from welding, my eyes burning from YouTube tutorials on a wheezing laptop. I told him I needed aluminum tubing. He didn't ask why, just drove to town and returned with a receipt and a handful of change. The next day, I noticed his old Chevy was gone from the lot. He said it was too broken to keep. But I saw the truth in the lines around his eyes. He'd sold it for me. The prototype took months. It was rough, heavy, but it folded, it rolled. I entered it in a state inventor's fair. A shaky video Samuel recorded as my pitch. I won third place, the judge calling it functional but plain. I didn't care. The letter that followed mattered more, a STEM cohort scholarship, a chance at college if I kept my grades up. Samuel didn't say proud. He gave me a box of screws. You'll need these, he said, and I knew what he meant. I was building something bigger than a wheelchair. I was building myself. The desert doesn't forgive, but it doesn't lie either. Its truth is in the way it strips you bare, leaving only what you're willing to carry. At 18, I stood on the edge of that truth, my hands calloused from tools, my heart hardened by absence. Samuel Ortiz, my grandfather, had given me more than a roof. He'd given me a way to rebuild myself, piece by stubborn piece. But the world I'd built in his house, shed surrounded by wire and grit, was about to face its first real test. Graduation loomed, and with it the weight of a future I hadn't dared imagine. I wasn't just Clara Mason, the girl left behind. I was someone who could make things work, who could turn rust into motion. And yet, the shadow of my parents. Sylvia and Martin Torres lingered, not in their presence, but in the silence they'd left me to fill. Graduation day was a blur of heat and noise. The high school gym in Taos was packed, balloons bobbing above proud families, the air thick with perfume and anticipation. I wore jeans and a clean blouse, the only one without grease stains, my hair pulled back tight to keep the desert dust at bay. Samuel sat in the back row, his face clean-shaven for the first time in months, his flannel swapped for a pressed shirt. He didn't wave, didn't hold a sign, but when I crossed the stage, his hands clapped longer than anyone's, a steady rhythm that cut through the cheers. Afterward, he leaned against a borrowed truck in the parking lot, the sun glinting off its dented hood. He handed me a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Figured you'd be hungry, he said. We drove back to the adobe house, windows down the air soft with the scent of sage. He didn't say he was proud, but the silence between us felt like a language we'd both learned. On my 26th birthday, Samuel made pancakes, the kitchen warm with the smell of brown butter and slightly scorched edges. A record spun in the corner, old jazz crackling through the quiet. He set a small box on the table, wrapped in wax paper, no ribbon. Inside was a brass pocket watch, heavy and cold, the back engraved with 2 words, "Move forward." I traced the letters, the metal cool against my thumb. The watch didn't tick. Its face frozen, but clear yours. I asked, my voice catching. He nodded. And now it's yours. He didn't explain, just pushed the pancakes toward me. Eat before they get stiff. I wore the watch around my neck, tucked under my shirt. Its weight a quiet anchor. That night we sat on the porch, the sky bruising purple. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling into the air. I told him about my job, a junior engineer at a small firm in Albuquerque, working on modular mobility devices. He listened, his eyes on the horizon. About time, someone saw what you can build. He said it was the last thing he ever told me. The next morning, the house was too still. No coffee brewing, no radio hum. Samuel's boots sat by the door, laces tied. I found him in his bedroom, lying on the quilt he'd had since I arrived. One hand on his chest, the other open as if reaching for something just out of grasp. His skin was cold when I touched his arm. I don't remember calling the ambulance or the neighbors who gathered their hats pressed to their chests, murmuring condolences. I sat on the porch, the watch clenched in my fist, the desert wind rustling the pinyon trees. He'd been the only one who stayed, who saw me not as a burden, but as a builder. The house echoed that week, every creak a reminder of his absence. At the funeral under the shade of cottonwoods, Sylvia and Martin appeared. Sylvia's arms opened wide. "Oh, Clara," she whispered, folding me into a hug before I could step back. She smelled of lavender and something expensive. Martin offered a handshake, then pulled me into a stiff embrace. "I didn't know you were coming," I said, my voice flat. Sylvia's eyes shimmered. "Of course we came. Samuel meant so much to us." I didn't say what burned in my chest, that Samuel never spoke their names. Not once. Outside the church, they steered me toward the parking lot, away from the neighbors, offering tamales and quiet memories. "We should catch up," Sylvia said, her voice soft. "Talk about what Samuel left behind." The words landed like a stone. I stopped walking. "What are you here for?" I asked, my tone sharp. Martin's smile was tight to help. "It's a lot to manage the farm, the house, the assets. You're young." Sylvia's hand touched my arm. "We want to be a family again." It's what he'd have wanted. I pulled away. "You signed me away. I wasn't a secret. I was a burden. You didn't lose me. You left me." Sylvia's smile faltered. "That's not fair, Clara." "No," I said, "it's not." Martin stepped closer, his voice low. "Don't let bitterness cloud what's practical. He left a lot. It affects us all." I looked at them, polished and poised, already counting what wasn't theirs. "He's not even buried," I said, "and you're already circling." I turned back to the church, to the people who'd shown up when it mattered, leaving them standing in the dust. The lawyer's office was a stark contrast to the desert, all polished wood and river views. The attorney, Elena Vasquez, was in her 60s, her blazer sharp, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She didn't waste time on small talk. "This won't take long," she said. Opening a folder, Sylvia and Martin were already seated when I arrived. Sylvia's hands folded neatly, Martin leaning back like he owned the room. Elena's voice was steady. Samuel Ortiz's estate transfers, in full to Clara Mason, his granddaughter and legal ward. The air tightened. Sylvia leaned forward. "That can't be right. He never discussed this with us." Elena didn't flinch. He didn't need to. "You relinquished guardianship in 2010. Here's the proof." She slid a signed form across the desk. The ink stark, the date undeniable. Martin's jaw twitched. "We were advised it was best for her stability." Elena continued. "The estate includes the farm, 4 land parcels, 2 patents, and majority shares in Ortiz Innovations. Total value just over $87 million. The number hit me like a gust, but I didn't react. I was too focused on Samuel's name, on what he'd built. Sylvia's voice was warm, too. "Warm, Clara. That's a lot of responsibility. You'll need guidance. We can help." Elena raised a hand. Samuel anticipated this. She produced a small scanner. "May I see the watch?" I hesitated, then unclasped it from my neck. She opened the back, revealing a tiny QR chip, scanned it. A green light blinked. Verified, she said. Martin frowned. What is this? Elena ignored him, turning to me. The will's activation is tied to the watch biometrically coded to your pulse. You're the sole heir. Clara Sylvia stood, her voice cracking. She's a child. I'm 26, I said, meeting her eyes. Martin added, You don't know what you're doing. This could ruin you. Elena's gaze was steel. You can contest it, but the watch. The biometric lock and your prior surrender of rights make this airtight. You'll lose. Sylvia's face paled. Clara, you don't want a court fight. Just talk to us. I stood, the watch heavy in my hand. You had 14 years to talk. You chose silence. I walked out the hallway, sharp with the scent of wax and something burnt. The desert waited outside, steady and true. The desert holds no secrets, only truths baked hard under the sun. I returned to Samuel's farm at dusk. The adobe house casting long shadows across the red earth. The gravel crunched under the tires of the borrowed truck, a sound that felt like a heartbeat, steady but fleeting. I stepped out, the air thick with the scent of pinon and cooling dust. The porch light glowed, though I hadn't left it on, a small detail that pricked my senses. Inside, the house felt different, not disturbed but touched, as if someone had lingered too long in its quiet corners. I checked the locks, the windows, the shed. Everything was in place, yet the air carried a weight like the moment before a storm breaks. I clutched the pocket watch, its brass cooled against my palm, and felt Samuel's presence in its stillness. He'd built this place, not just the house, but the life it held, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. The next morning, I found an envelope wedged under the front gate, manila, and crisp. Inside was a formal notice from Sylvia and Martin Torres, my parents, announcing their intent to challenge Samuel's will. The ground's undue influence and questionable mental competency. Beneath it, a second envelope held printed screenshots of Samuel's medical records, highlighted notes on blood pressure, a vague mention of cognitive decline. Their strategy was clear. They weren't just fighting for the estate, they were rewriting his legacy, painting him as frail, manipulable to justify their claim. My stomach churned, not with fear, but with a cold, sharp anger. They'd abandoned me at 12, left me to rebuild myself in this desert, and now they dared to tarnish the man who'd raised me. I set the papers on the kitchen table next to the chipped Ortiz timber mug and let the truth settle. This wasn't about money. It was about control, about erasing what Samuel and I had built. That afternoon, their black SUV rolled up the dirt road, slow and deliberate, like a predator, unsure of its prey. Sylvia stepped out first, Martin behind her, their polished city clothes stark against the desert's rawness. I stood on the porch, my boots planted firm, the watch heavy around my neck. Clara? Sylvia said, her voice soft. Practiced. We need to talk. I didn't move. You've had years to talk. Say what you came to say. Martin cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to the house. This is too much for you. The farm, the patents. It's not what Samuel would have wanted, dragging you into this. I laughed, a sharp sound that startled even me. You don't get to speak for him, you never did. Sylvia's face tightened. We're trying to help, Clara. You're young. You don't understand what this kind of money does to people. I stepped forward, my voice low. I understand what you did to me. You left me here, signed me away, and now you're back, because there's something to take. Where were you when I was 12, waiting by the window? When Samuel sat through chemo and I held his hand? Where were you then? Sylvia flinched, her eyes glistening, but Martin's voice stayed calm. You're letting anger cloud your judgment. We're family. We can work this out. I opened the gate, my hands steady. You're not my family. Samuel was, get off my land. They stood there stunned as I closed the gate behind them. The SUV's engine roared to life, and they drove away. The dust swallowing their taillights. I stood there until the horizon reclaimed its silence, my heart pounding with a clarity I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just about the farm. It was about the life Samuel had given me, the tools, the trust, the belief that I could build something lasting. A week later, I found a tin box under the floorboards of Samuel's study, hidden beneath a rug that never sat flat. I'd been moving his desk to clean my hands, brushing against a small iron hook. Inside were his journal's pages, filled with his slanted script, and a letter addressed to me, Clara. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But if I raised you right, you're standing tall. This land is yours, not just for crops or memory, but for something bigger. His words unfolded like a map, sketches of robotics, workshops, budgets for mobile classrooms, plans for a foundation to teach kids like me, left behind, underestimated, hungry for a place to belong. He called it the Ortiz Circle, not charity, but a space to build, fail, and try again. I read until dawn, the shed's lamp casting shadows over blueprints and dreams. Samuel hadn't just left me in a state, he'd left me a purpose. I called Elena Vasquez that morning, my voice steady as I read her the letter. She listened, her silence respectful. He told me you'd find it. She said finally, let's make it happen. By fall, I'd turned the old equipment barn into a prototype lab. The smell of grease and sawdust mingled with the hum of new tools. I hired a retired engineer from Santa Fe, a woman named Rosa who'd built prosthetics for veterans. We ordered parts in bulk and Elena filed the nonprofit paperwork. The first group of kids arrived in October, their laughter nervous but alive. They were foster kids, runaways, dreamers with nowhere else to go. I watched them fumble with circuits, curse at blown fuses, cheer when a motor whirred to life. One girl, Sophia, 11 and fierce, built a robotic arm that poured water into a cup. Her eyes lit up when it worked. "Can I keep it?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. Build a better one." I handed her a soldering iron, and she grinned, already sketching her next design. Evenings. I sat on the porch, the watch around my neck, its weight a reminder of Samuel's faith. The desert stretched dark and quiet, but the lab's lights burned bright. I heard his boots in my memory, the scrape of his chair, but I also heard Sophia's laughter, the hum of a drill, the clatter of tools. This was what he'd meant, not just land, but legacy, a place where kids like me could find their own strength. Sylvia and Martin hadn't called since their visit, but their legal challenge loomed a shadow. I refused to let darken what I was building. I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for the truth Samuel had seen in me, for the kids who'd come after, for the belief that we could all build something unbroken. One night I sat in the shed, the journals open before me. Sophia's robotic arm on the workbench, still clumsy but full of promise. The desert wind howled outside, carrying the scent of rain. I traced the watch's engraving, moved forward, and felt Samuel's hand on my shoulder, not in flesh, but in purpose. I wasn't alone anymore. The lab was alive, the kids were building, and I was carrying something bigger than grief. This wasn't about winning. It was about standing tall, about turning silence into something that could speak for itself. The desert doesn't bend, but it teaches you how to stand. Its vastness strips away pretense, leaving only what you're willing to fight for. At 26, I'd learned to fight not with fists, but with the quiet resolve Samuel Ortiz had carved into me. The adobe house in Taos was no longer just a shelter. It was a cornerstone, a testament to the life I was building. The Ortiz Circle hummed with purpose. The barn now, a lab where kids like Sophia soldiered their dreams into reality. But the shadow of Sylvia and Martin Torres lingered, their legal challenge, a persistent thorn threatening to unravel everything Samuel had entrusted to me. I wasn't fighting for land or money. I was fighting for the truth, for the legacy of a man who saw me when no one else did, and for the kids who needed this place as much as I once had. It was late November when Sylvia returned. The air carried a bite, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. I was sweeping leaves from the porch, the broom's rhythm a counterpoint to the desert's silence. Her black SUV crept up the dirt road slower than before, as if unsure of its welcome. She stepped out alone. No sunglasses, no jewelry, just a plain coat and eyes that seemed smaller, wearier. I leaned on the broom, my boots planted on the steps. "Clara," she said, her voice barely rising above the wind. "I'm not here to fight. I just want to see." Her gaze drifted to the barn where the Ortiz Circle's sign stood proud. Kids spilling out with wires and tools, their laughter sharp against the quiet. I read about it, she said in the paper. I didn't know you'd actually do something with it. I didn't respond, letting the silence speak for me. She stepped closer but stopped at the gate, her hands twisting together. You were always like him even as a kid, stubborn, brilliant. The words stung not because they were untrue, but because she thought she had the right to say them. You didn't come to say that, I said, my voice even. She shook her head. No, I came to say I'm sorry. For everything, we were scared. Clara selfish, but mostly scared. The wind lifted a swirl of leaves around her boots, and she flinched. Martin's sick. She continued, pancreatic cancer. It's advanced, he doesn't have long. Her voice cracked, but I felt no urge to comfort her. I nodded, once the watch heavy against my chest. You don't have to come, she said. I wouldn't blame you. She lingered, waiting for something I couldn't give. Then she turned back to the SUV. Her step slow, her shoulders hunched against the cold. The engine started and she was gone, the dust settling like a curtain. I stood there, the broom still in my hands, feeling the weight of her words, but not their pull. I didn't owe her forgiveness. I owed myself the life I was building. That night, I sat in the shed, the soldering iron warm beside Sophia's robotic arm. Now refined, its movements smoother. The journals lay open, Samuel's handwriting. A map of dreams I was bringing to life. The Ortiz circle wasn't just a foundation. It was a promise to kids like Sophia, to myself, to the man who'd given me tools instead of pity. I traced the watch's engraving, moved forward, and felt a quiet shift. Not closure, but liberation. I wasn't bound by Sylvia's apologies or Martin's illness. I was free to build, to carry Samuel's vision without looking back. The desert wind howled outside, but inside the lab's lights burned steady, a beacon in the dark. By spring, the Ortiz circle had grown. More kids arrived, their hands eager, their eyes bright with possibility. Sophia, now 12, mentored 2 younger girls, teaching them to wire circuits with the same patience Samuel had shown me. I watched her, saw pieces of myself in her stubborn focus, her quiet pride when a motor hummed to life. The lab was alive with noise, drills, laughter, the clatter of dropped tools. Rosa, the engineer from Santa Fe, guided them with a grin, her own designs inspiring new projects. We'd secured a grant enough to expand the barn to add a second lab for advanced robotics. The local paper ran a feature calling it a haven for young innovators. But to me it was more. It was the home I'd never had as a child. A place where failure was just a step toward building something better. I moved my work to the loft above the barn, a narrow space Samuel once used for broken tools. Now it held a desk, a kettle, and a window overlooking the valley. I'd sit there after the kids left the desert, stretching silver under the moonlight. The watch rested on the desk, its face still silent, but its weight alive. Move forward, it said, and I did. The legal challenge from Sylvia and Martin fizzled Elena Vasquez's airtight documentation, leaving no room for their claims. They didn't call again, and I didn't wait for them to. The farm was mine, the patents, the shares, but more than that, the purpose was mine. Samuel had seen it in me, a builder, not a burden, and I was proving him right. One evening, Sophia stayed late, her robotic arm now precise enough to lift a cup without spilling. She looked at me, her eyes fierce. Can I run the program next year? I smiled, remembering the girl who'd cried over her first design. If you train the others, it's yours. She nodded, already planning, and I saw Samuel in her in the way she didn't need praise, just a chance. As she left, I sat in the loft, my journal open but unwritten. The wind slipped through the shutters, cool and clean. I didn't need to write. The story was in the lab below, in the kids' laughter, in the hum of machines coming to life. Samuel's legacy wasn't the land or the money. It was the belief that broken things could be rebuilt, that broken kids could become builders. I locked the shed that night, the air sharp with the promise of spring. The lab's lights glowed behind me, a constellation of hope. I didn't hear Samuel's boots or his chair scraping the floor, but I felt him in the quiet, in the watch around my neck, in the work I was doing. The past hadn't given me apologies or neat endings, and I no longer needed them. It had given me something better, a place to begin to build, to move forward. Sophia would take the program next year, and I'd be there not to carry her hope, but to hand her the tools to carry her own. The desert stretched wide, its silence no longer heavy but alive. I was free not from pain, but from the need to prove myself to anyone but me. The watch ticked in my mind, not with time, but with purpose, and I stepped into the night, ready for whatever came next. The desert night was alive, its pulse thrumming through the open window of my apartment in Phoenix. The city's lights flickered below, a constellation of human ambition. But it was the memory of the CRV's keys in my hand that grounded me. At 28, Elise Harper had reclaimed more than a car. I'd reclaimed the right to my own story, to move forward without the weight of doubt or the shadow of my parents' lies. The hospital job was days away. My scrubs folded neatly on the chair, my route to Tempe mapped with precision. But it was the quiet moments like this one, sitting alone with Henry's note taped to my mirror, that felt like the truest victory. The note read, "So you can go wherever your heart takes you on your own terms." And for the first time, I believed I could. The past week had been a whirlwind. The new title from the DMV sat on my kitchen table, a tangible proof of what I'd fought for. I hadn't heard from Margaret or Paul since the barbecue. Their silence a wall I no longer tried to climb. I didn't need their apologies. Their absence had taught me to rely on myself, to trust the strength Henry had seen in me all along. I thought of him often, his steady hands, his quiet pride, the way he'd stood by me at the DMV. His presence a shield against the world. He'd given me more than a car, he'd given me the courage to demand what was mine, to stand tall when others tried to make me small. I drove the CRV every day now, not just for errands, but for the sheer joy of it. The hum of the engine, the feel of the wheel under my hands was a language of freedom. I drove to the hospital for my orientation, parking under a mesquite tree. Its shade a small mercy in the Arizona heat. The trauma center was a maze of white walls and beeping monitors, but I walked through it with a confidence I hadn't known I possessed. The other nurses were kind, their smiles welcoming, but it was the patient's bandaged, fragile fighting that reminded me why I'd chosen this path. Each chart I read, each bandage I changed, felt like a continuation of the work I'd started in Henry's garage, fixing what was broken, building something whole. One evening, I drove to the edge of the city where the desert reclaimed the land. The CRV climbed a rocky path to a lookout point, the city sprawling below like a dream I could finally touch. I sat on the hood, the metal still warm from the day, and pulled Henry's note from my pocket. The words were worn, but clear, a promise I'd made to myself as much as he'd made to me. I thought of Margaret's lie at the barbecue, her syrupy voice claiming I couldn't handle the car, of Paul's silence, his refusal to meet my eyes. They'd taken more than a vehicle. They'd tried to take my agency, my right to define myself. But I'd taken it back, not with anger, but with truth, with the quiet resolve Henry had taught me. A text from Jenna, my roommate, buzzed my phone. "Dinner's on me, if you're back by 8. I smiled, sliding back into the driver's seat. The keys felt like an extension of my hand. The engine a heartbeat I could trust. I drove home, the desert fading into city lights, the road unspooling like a story I was writing myself. At the apartment, Jenna had ordered pizza, the box open on our wobbly table. "You look different," she said, tossing me a slice, "like you're carrying less." I laughed. "Maybe I am." We ate, the TV humming in the background, and I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. Not because the fight was over, but because I'd chosen to let it go. The hospital became my rhythm. Early shifts, late nights. The steady cadence of saving lives. I drove the CRV each day, its presence a reminder that I'd earned this every mile, every moment. One morning, as I parked, a letter slipped from the glove box, Henry's handwriting on the envelope. I'd forgotten he'd given me a second copy of the bill of sale just in case I opened it, and a smaller note fell out. "Elise, you're stronger than you know. Keep driving." My eyes stung, not with tears, but with gratitude. He'd known even then that I'd need to hear it again. I tucked the note into my pocket next to the first and walked into the hospital, my scrubs crisp, my heart full. Weeks later, I got a call from Henry, his voice warm through the phone. How's the road treating you? I laughed, leaning against the CRV in the hospital lot. Like it's mine. He chuckled. Good. Got a new project for you when you visit Daisy. Needs a ramp for the porch. Think you're up for it? I grinned. I'll bring my tools. The call ended, but his belief lingered a steady hum, like the engine beneath me. I didn't need to prove myself to him. He'd always seen me, not as the girl Margaret and Paul had doubted, but as the woman who could build, who could drive, who could choose her own path. As spring bloomed, the desert turned vibrant wildflowers, dotting the landscape like stars. I drove to Tucson one weekend, the CRV steady on the highway. Henry waited on the porch, Daisy wagging at his feet. We built the ramp together, our hands moving in sync the way they had in the garage years ago. You're getting good at this, he said, hammering a nail. I smiled. Had a good teacher. We didn't talk about the barbecue about Margaret or Paul. We didn't need to. The ramp was finished by sunset, sturdy and true. And we sat on the porch, the desert stretching before us. You did it, he said, his voice quiet. I nodded. We did. Driving back to Phoenix, the windows down the air, warm and alive, I felt a release not from the past, but from its hold on me. Margaret and Paul were shadows now, their lies unable to touch the life I was building. The CRV hummed, the road stretched wide, and I knew this was more than motion. It was freedom, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that settles quiet and sure. I didn't need their approval, their apologies, or their presence. I had Henry's belief, my own strength, and a road that was mine to choose. Somewhere between the city and the desert, I exhaled, the weight of doubt gone. The keys in my hand, a promise kept. This was my return, not to a place, but to myself, and I was ready for wherever the road led next.